Welcome to the Herald Democrat Sports Podcast. I'm the sports editor of the Herald Democrat, Jason Del Rosa, and you're listening to the latest edition of the Herald Democrat Sports Podcast. We are about to enter Week 6 of the high school football season. That's more than the halfway point for some of our teams. That's almost to the halfway point for some of our teams, and we have several teams on bye this week, a mixed bag of the schedule that may be our lightest of the season, but there's still plenty of intrigue because everybody is officially in district play. We have several district openers to talk about. We have everything about what you're going to get Thursday and Friday night this week, because we do have a Thursday game. And it's brought to you by our sponsor here on the podcast, Frontier Golf Carts. Experience the thrill of savings to celebrate their new Denison location, proudly serving the greater Texoma area, where they're launching with the lowest prices of the year. This marks an exciting new chapter in the 11-year history of Frontier Golf Carts as they expand from their original location in Salina. For their grand opening, come see the awesome collection of new carts with up to $1,500 off, including the 2024 Frontier EV Lightning F4 with all seats facing forward. New lithium battery-powered golf carts with backup cameras and touchscreen entertainment start at $7,495. Visit frontiergolfcarts.com or check out their Facebook page for their latest specials. And if you would like to sponsor the podcast, or you know somebody that would like to sponsor the podcast, contact Renee Marler at rmarler@cherryroad.com, and you can join Frontier Golf Carts in sponsoring the podcast every week through the last team standing, which, as most of you know, has been right before Christmas with the deep playoff runs of Gunner. So we do a podcast every week, comes out on Wednesday, plenty of time for you to listen. So if you would like to sponsor, or you know somebody that you think would be a good sponsor for the podcast, please reach out to Renee at rmarler@cherryroad.com. So, as we always do, as we enter Week 6, we will start at the top, we will work our way down to the bottom, and we will talk about every team and what they're doing, where they stand in their district, and what it means going forward. Like I said, we do have several teams on bye this week, so obviously won't have previews for them, but we can definitely talk about where they stand after their games from last week. But we will begin, as we always do, at the top with the Sherman Bearcats and their District 5-5A Division I matchup at Frisco Heritage. This is the game on Thursday night, 7 o'clock at the Star down in Frisco. And this has turned into a very interesting game. Sherman is now 2-3 overall, 1-2 in district play after they won last week 40-13 against Frisco Centennial. Frisco Heritage is 2-2. They are 0-2 after they lost 48-7 against Frisco Lone Star. They had the bye to start off district play. Then they lost to Frisco 27-26 2 weeks ago, and then lost the game to Lone Star last week. So they are at the bottom of the standings with Lebanon Trail. They're both 0-2. With Sherman's win, they get to 1-2. They are tied with Wakeland and Centennial at 1-2. Frisco is 1-1, and McKinney North is 2-1. Lone Star and Frisco Reedy both at 3-0. So in one weekend, Sherman goes from 9th place to a tie for 5th place. And the interesting reason that jump is huge is because they are tied with the team that they beat, so they have the tiebreaker over them. They are playing a team below them in the standings this week in Frisco Heritage. They have another team below them coming up in Lebanon Trail. They have one of the other teams they're tied with at Wakeland, and they have a game against the team right in front of them for the 4th playoff spot in Frisco. And when I talked to head coach Josh Allman on last Wednesday, he said, look, I know we're 0-2. It's not where we want to be. It's not the start that we had hoped for, but there are 5 games left that will determine what we can do. and we have a good shot to win 4 of those 5. And if we win those games, that will put us in the position that we want to be. And they took care of business with the first step in that stretch by beating Centennial 40-13 at home and on homecoming. You never want to lose on homecoming. And they jump out to a quick lead. Centennial ties it at the end of the first quarter. Then Sherman scores twice in the second quarter. They start the third with a touchdown, and they're able to cruise from there. Kobe Ray Short with the big night, 3 touchdowns, 1 receiving, 1 rushing, 1 on a 45-yard punt return. He finished with 12 carries for 67 yards and that score, 2 catches for 36 yards and that score as well. Caleb Orr, 8 of 14 passing for 126 yards and 3 touchdowns. He had one to Randy Nelson to open the scoring. Nelson had 2 catches for 42 yards. Micah Hunt, 4 catches for 48 yards. And the other touchdown, Sherman rushes for over 200 yards as well. Jacavian Hughes, 20 carries, 94 yards, and the touchdown to cap it. And that's the best output for Sherman on the season in terms of points, in terms of controlling the ground game, which is something that Coach Allman has said they've wanted to do from the start of the season. And it was a back-against-the-wall game effort. You couldn't fall behind 0-3 in this district. It's a big district. You start running out of time, even though you have some of the games in front. There was really no margin for error after what's turning out to not be a bad loss, in the sense that McKinney North has now moved all the way to 3rd place. So maybe we were a little hasty with their bad start, but Sherman did what they needed to do. They held an opponent to 13 points. They outscored them. Essentially, it was after a 7-7 stalemate to outscore them 33-6 over the final 3 quarters. They got 2 turnovers. It was exactly what Sherman needed to do, and they responded to what the situation called for. Now, again, here's the situation. Frisco Heritage, in that same situation that Sherman was in last year. They're at home. They're playing in the Star. For whatever that means, obviously that's a big deal for a lot of kids that don't get to play there. I'm not sure if that's Frisco Heritage's only game in the Star this year, but that's a big deal for them to have the game on their turf, and they have to win because they can't fall behind 0-3 in this district, much like Lebanon Trail can't in their game this week. So you're gonna get everything you want from Frisco Heritage. And again, it's a game that is against somebody below you in the standings. You need to take care of business. And if you get to 2-2 in this district with what they have coming up, again, it's all right in front of Sherman to make a run for a playoff spot. They're going to have to do it every week from here on out. We'll see if they can build on the momentum of this win, but they're in a good place. And that's all you could ask for as you hit the halfway point of the season. You got 5 games left. You probably need to win 4 of them at a minimum, and it's got to start, or it's going to continue rather, with the momentum you got from last week. So we'll see what Sherman can do. Again, this is a Thursday game, so if you're going to go watch them, Thursday at 7 o'clock down at the Star against Frisco Heritage in District 5, 5A, Division 1 action. The next team we'll talk about is the Denison Yellow Jackets. They are on their bye this week in District 4, 5A, Division 2. They go into their bye off a loss, 49-21 against Walnut Grove. So Denison is 0-5 on the season and 0-3 in district play. This is a district that has 3 undefeated teams at this point. Melissa is 3-0. Lovejoy and Walnut Grove are both 2-0. Frisco Independence and Frisco Emerson are 2-1. Frisco Memorial is 1-2. Anna is 0-2. and Frisco Liberty is at the bottom with Denison at 0-3. So to recap their game from Friday, it was a tale of two halves as Walnut Grove comes out, does all its scoring in the first half, is able to build up the 49-0 lead at halftime. And it was a little bit of everything. There were some short touchdown runs off some good drives. There were some big pass plays on some deep balls. There was a mistake on special teams that led to a touchdown that allowed Walnut Grove to get out to the big lead. And we talked last week about how this was going to be obviously a tough game because this was a team that beat Frisco Emerson. Denison was coming off the loss to Frisco Emerson to kind of have a gauge of where they might stand in regards to this. It was not helpful that there were players and starters sidelined. There are still some injuries that people are working through this week. There were also some disciplinary issues as well. And so they were already starting from behind the eight ball in this one, and it did not go well in the first half. Obviously, a much better second half to score 21 points, to hold Walnut Grove and their backups off the board in the second half. Definitely a silver lining. Definitely some positive momentum going into the bye. Lucas Womack got the start at quarterback. He was 17 of 29 passing for 200 yards with a touchdown and an interception. Brandon Douglas with 6 catches for 132 yards and that touchdown catch. Darian Vaughn, 5 catches for 35 yards. Corbin Johnson, 3 catches for 20 yards. Jalen Butler led the rushing attack with 11 carries for 39 yards and a touchdown. And Roman Henderson also scored on the ground as well. Due to sacks, the rushing totals for Denison and a botched special teams play that ended up losing 30 yards that comes out of the rushing totals. Denison had 36 carries for 14 yards. Even if you take out that play, it was basically a yard per carry for Denison in this one, and that's not going to get the job done in a lot of respects. I thought Womack played well for a guy who was being thrust into a starting position. He'd only gotten some limited snaps in the first games, and so I thought he got better obviously as the game went on. Got a lot more comfortable, made some big throws, put some guys in some positions to make some plays. The interception was right before halftime, and it was not in a good spot. It was deep in there in Denison's end, and that led to a touchdown. In the final minute right before the break. So that one could have been avoided. Maybe would have made it 42-0 at halftime instead of 49. But it was another game where Denison finds itself falling behind, not able to get going early enough to make a difference in the game. And so that's where Denison is going into their bye. They're in a position where next week they have Frisco Memorial, who's a team right in front of them in the standings. Then they're going to play Frisco Liberty, again, who is like them, hasn't won a game yet. So there's 2 winnable games coming up, and hopefully everything gets taken care of. All the guys are healthy coming out of the bye. It's been a weekly process. When I talk to Coach Whitson every week, it seems that it's like this guy is back and this guy is back. We're waiting for this guy, and then the next week comes and it's like this guy is back and we're still waiting for this guy. So the bye, I think, obviously has come at a good time. It was going to be at a good time anyway because I think coaches and kids are still sort of conditioned about having the bye right in the middle of your season. You play 5 games, you regroup, and then you go the rest of the season. For some of the smaller districts or the smaller schools, their districts are smaller, so they have that. They all have that bye before district play starts. So it's a good stopping point. But obviously, with the season that Denison has had, it's a welcome break for them to regroup and hopefully work on the things that they need to work on and maybe tweak some things. They've got some actual time to prepare to make those changes. And like I said, they have 2 games against 2 opponents that I think are in winnable form, much like the Independence game a couple weeks ago. So we'll see what Denison can do when they get back in action next week. but that's where they sit on their bye week in District 4, 5A, Division 2. One of the teams coming off the bye week that we don't have a game to talk about from last week is Van Alstyne. While the rest of that district got started, and that is District 5, 4A, Division 2, Van Alstyne had its bye, and it is going to kick off against Crum at home, 7 o'clock on Friday. Crum won their district opener 55-35 against Cattle Mills, so they are 5-0 and obviously 1-0 in district play. And Van Alstyne comes in with the 1-3 record, and the biggest thing that we're going to want to see from Van Alstyne is how much work and how much better did your defense get to prepare for district play. They had 2 weeks coming off the 3 straight losses, all of them giving up huge point totals. The most recent one to Aubrey. The one thing that I will say is when it comes to the teams in this district, or at least most of them, Van Alstyne has done very well against them. Crum is an example of that. They've played Crum 4 times. They've beaten Crum the last 4 years. They have won them pretty easily. Last year's was the closest one. But now you have a Crum team that is having its best season in almost a decade. They're about to have a winning record for the first time since 2016. They've already matched their win total from last year, and they're going to come in with a boatload of confidence. I said last week when we talked about this district, there's a chance that the Crum Cattle Mills winner was going to be the front runner for the district title. The other teams that won their district openers were Sanger and Farmersville. So those are the 3 teams that are 1-0. Bonham and Gainesville were the other 2 losers, and so they are 0-1. So we're going to see right off the bat where Van Alstyne might fit in this pecking order. If they're able to take down Crum, they've got a chance to be the front runner. I think right now Crum is the front runner, and much like in situations where they've we talk about like when you have to face a gunner right off the bat, or you face a Lovejoy, which is something Denison's had to do right off the bat, or with Sherman, they face Frisco Reedy. There's a chance you get the big dog out of the way immediately, and then you don't have to worry about them the rest of the season. You take care of business against whoever else, and you do the best that you can with that schedule. And I think this might be a situation for Van Alstyne. We know they can score. They've scored in all 4 of their games. The offense has not been the problem. The defense has been the problem the last 3 weeks. And so it's at home, so that may help a little bit. But again, you're coming off a bye where you'd like to see some of the tweaks and some of the changes to throw some wrenches in what Crum thinks you might do. I've got to assume that Crum thinks there's going to be some sense of changes. They just don't know till they see it because of the bye week. So I think that's an advantage there that maybe Van Alstyne can take advantage of for a quarter or the first half to shore things up and about things that Crum's not expecting. But it's going to be a tough start for them. And again, we said there's only 3 teams in this district that came into the games last week with a winning record. So I think no matter the outcome, Van Alstyne still is in a good spot for a playoff berth, but it just depends on if what they worked on defensively starts off well and carries through the rest of district play, because we know they can score some offense. So that's Van Alstyne hosting Crum in 5-4A Division 2 action. That's a 7 o'clock start on Friday out at Panther Stadium. Moving down to the 3A ranks, we have both of the teams playing this week in District 6 3A Division 1. We'll talk about Pottsboro first because they had a game last week. The Cardinals opened district play with a game where they pulled away in the second half, 57-22 against the Life Oak Cliff. This game was 29-16 at halftime. Pottsboro scored twice in the third and fourth quarters to break things open, so they remain undefeated. They are 5-0 and obviously 1-0 in district. Life Oak Cliff is 3-2. They dropped to 0-1 in district play. And Whitesboro, we said, had the bye last week. We'll talk about them next. The other 2 teams that won in this district were Pilot Point and Palmer. They beat Madison and A-plus Academy respectively. And obviously for Madison to lose to Pilot Point coming into this game, that is going to make Cardinal fans very happy to see, because Pilot Point had lost 15 straight games. We've talked about them a couple times this season, including the loss that they suffered against Howe, and Madison lost to Pilot Point 35-18 last week. So an almost 3-touchdown margin against a team that hadn't won a game in a year and a half. And now you're trying to take on a team that's ranked number 7 in 3A Division 1. You're coming to their place. Pottsboro's feeling very good about themselves. Again, the offense just continues to hum right along. Caden Humphrey with the big game in this one. A lot of it on the ground. 26 carries for 229 yards and 5 touchdown runs. He was only 3 of 13 passing for 73 yards with a touchdown and an interception. The touchdown went to Landon Goodman, who had 2 catches for 52 yards. Xavier Brady and Zach Caton each had 1 catch for 18 yards. Carson Nix on the ground, 10 carries, 75 yards and a touchdown. Matthew Wise, 9 carries for 45 yards and a score as well. And the Cardinals continue to roll. Their lowest point total so far of the season is 32. And after that start where it seemed like every game was a close one, they've started to assert their dominance. Again, we talked about the preview of this district, that Pottsboro and Palmer are probably the 2 favorites. Palmer had a really big win this past week in terms of margin of victory, not in terms of importance, but it was the look of a team that's going to beat up on some of these smaller schools in the district, or the weaker schools in the district. Again, at Dallas A-plus Academy is sitting at 0-5. Madison coming into this game against Pottsboro is 1-4. Pilot Point is 1-4. We talked about obviously their win is against a team in the district. So the bottom 3 seem to have asserted themselves in that way. And so what's interesting about can Pottsboro obviously keep their hold on what everybody thinks is the top spot and not slip up against a team like Dallas Madison. But then that brings into account what you have with Whitesboro, because they're kicking off 6-3A Division 1 play, and they had their bye last week. So they got to see all the stuff happening. They got to see Pottsboro, pull away, put up a big number. They got to see Palmer put up a big number, winning 79-12 against A-plus Academy. Obviously, they saw what Pilot Point did against Madison, and that's one of the opponents in Pilot Point that they're most familiar with, because they come over from their old district in the latest realignment. So you have Whitesboro, who we talked about 2 weeks ago. Of all the teams that didn't want to have a bye, was Whitesboro. They got back on track. They had an exciting win down to the wire. Had a lot of good feelings about where things were, and then they had to sit for 2 weeks. They get an opponent that they were able to kind of compare, because they obviously, being in the area, knowing Pottsboro, having playing Pottsboro recently, you can kind of get a feel for that. So I'm interested to see obviously what Whitesboro can do. They're sitting at 2-2. This is a home game. It's the district opener. Whitesboro has not lost a district opener in quite a while. They've won 13 straight coming into this matchup. Their defense has been, I would say, relatively good. They've held 3 of the 4 opponents to 25 points or less. Obviously, the one caveat is the Graham score that was very lopsided. But if you want to throw that out as the outlier, they've done well in those other ones. Life Oak Cliff is a team. I feel like to say they've had sort of a roller coaster season the last couple years. I think that's probably safe. They've matched their win total from last year, so I think that shows that they are a little bit better. This may be sort of the upswing year for them. But again, you saw what they did against Pottsboro, and so it's going to be interesting. It's always that rest versus rust factor when you're talking about teams that are coming off buys. And is it going to take a while for them to get going? Do they come firing it out of the gate? Are they Are they super pumped because it's at home and it's this district opener and we're ready to go because we won the last game and we cleaned up some things that we need to clean up, be a little sharper offensively. They're obviously, they've got some injuries at some spots, dealing with a bye week. You never know how long that kept guys out, and will keep them out. So I think this is an interesting response, or an interesting way to see where this district is headed based off how Whitesboro handles Life Oak Cliff, because it's obvious that Pottsboro and Palmer are going to be in the mix for not just the playoffs, but for a top spot. And again, I'm not one to tell people to look ahead, but I can look ahead because that's part of my job, and I will bring it up again that Whitesboro-Pottsboro is the last game of the season, and so we don't know how that's going to affect things by then. I'm very hopeful, for my sake, since that's a game that I'm going to be at, that it is potentially for the district title, or somebody may need it for a playoff spot. But by then, I think in this district, there's also a chance that a lot of things could already be decided by the time we get there because of the order of operations on the schedule. But so that's why I'm interested to see where Whitesboro stands. When it comes to this district, they're the last ones to join the party, and depending on if they can make a statement or not, based on the other games in this district, particularly because when you look at not just for this week, but next week, obviously. So Palmer is playing Pilot Point. So obviously one of the teams that started 1-0 is going to lose. I think everybody thinks that's going to be Palmer. And then the question is, if Whitesboro wins this one, do you have Pottsboro, Whitesboro, and Palmer as the three teams that are standing? And Pottsboro and Palmer are going to play next week. So that is obviously a huge game. And the next week, Palmer plays Whitesboro. So we'll know pretty early what the pecking order might be in this district. And if Whitesboro wants to join the party for a playoff spot and potentially for the district title, they can't afford to lose to somebody that's already lost in this district. Or maybe they can. They can pull off some upsets along the way. But I think Whitesboro's in a really good spot, again, with that momentum coming off of the game entering the bye. They're at home. It's a team that got knocked around a little bit last week by Pottsboro, and we'll see what happens in that 6-3A Division I matchup at Whitesboro, hosting Life Oak Cliff. Dropping down to 7-3A Division II, we have a couple of the teams playing, and we have one team on bye. We'll talk about the games that are this week first, because that's always more fun. The interesting game of the week, Bells at Callisburg in this district. Bells is 2-3 and 0-1 after they lost 42-6 against Gunner. And Callisburg is also 2-3, 0-1 after they lost 43-29 against Leonard. Because there's only the limited number of games left, we're at the halfway point. Every game at this point starts to shift and shape a district. This is one of the big ones early on in this district. I don't think anybody is surprised that Bells was unable to beat Gunner. We'll talk about them in a second, but that has been a game that has gone against Bells in the past. They have always rebounded. They've always ended up in second place. This group has a lot of injuries. They are, I don't want to say shorthanded, because some of the guys, they have that next man up mentality, and they've had some guys fill in that were able to get the job done for the slot T offense. In the game against Gunner, Bryson Thompson, 16 carries for 57 yards and the touchdown. Jackson Brown, 12 carries for 59 yards. Easton Branham, 6 carries for 35 yards. But it's not the lineup they thought they were going to have going into the year. It's not maybe the lineup they thought they were or the lineup that they had just a couple weeks ago. So they're a little shorthanded, and obviously for some of those guys, that also affects people playing on defense as well, because that's at this level, a lot of your best players are going to be going both ways. So That's why this game is so interesting. I don't think it's surprising for people to see Carlsberg lose to Leonard, because Leonard has been very good. They've been a playoff team in this district. They've got a lot of weapons on offense. So to see that happen is not surprising either. But this is a huge swing game early in this district because one of the teams that is undefeated in district play at 1-0 is Gunner. They are not playing this week, so they cannot beat. Nobody can lose to Gunner this week. The other two teams that are 1-0 right now, Howe and Leonard, we'll talk about next because they play each other. So one of them is going to get a loss. And Blue Ridge, who had the district bye, is back to playing this week, and they're going to play SNS. We'll talk about that game in a little bit. So there's a chance that there's only two undefeated teams after 2 weeks in this district. Or excuse me, there'll be three, and there could be three. Obviously, the Howe Leonard winner is going to stay undefeated. But the loser of Bell's Carlsberg dropping to 0-2, that could put you in a lot of trouble. And again, if it's Carlsberg, that's trouble because you still got to play Gunner, and that's an extremely tall task. And if you lose to Leonard and Bells to start, we're already talking about two teams that made the playoffs last year. So you're already behind the 8 ball for teams that are expecting to claim those spots again. And it's the same thing for Bells. Bells would have a little easier chance to rebound because, again, they've lost to Gunner. And until somebody beats Gunner, you assume everybody in this district is going to have at least that loss. So you'd have to rebound and you'd have to maybe win a tiebreaker. But it's a huge swing game early in this district to kind of see where things might end up 5 weeks from now. But it's a huge early game, and I don't know if having it be on the road. I don't know if the fact that I'm not sure if some of those guys are going to be back for Bells next week. That if this game was 2 weeks ago or 2 weeks from now, that maybe there's a different outcome. But again, I think a lot of people coming into this district, they have that respect and they have that understanding of what this district has been the last couple of years, where Gunner is always the number one and Bells is always the number two. And I've said it before. I said it last week and getting ready for this district. Bells, since the move over to this district, has beaten everybody else but Gunner. So I think you have to treat Bells that way with everybody in respect to everybody else. Everybody looks at Gunner and says, somebody's got to beat him, and until somebody does, we're just going to assume that that's the way it is. And you can say that about Bells, is that nobody else in this district has beaten Bells. So until somebody does it, we've got to assume that they're going to get second. Are we all fighting for third? And I know that's not the way a lot of people would want you to think, but sometimes you have to be realistic. You got to beat the people you can to get the spot you can get. And that's just the way it's been in this district. And it's been in this district more than one occasion where it's not just a 1 year fluke type of thing. So this is a chance for Carlsberg on their turf to say, we're going to be that team. And Bells is certainly not going to back down. But again, this is, I think, the most interesting of the three matchups because of how much could swing. And at the end, like I said, we could be talking about this might be the game that kept somebody out or got somebody in, depending on how the rest of the district shakes out. So we'll see what happens as Bells travels to Carlsberg for 7:30 on Friday in 7-3A Division II action. The other game, or the second game of importance in this district, is Leonard at Howe. 4-1, 1-0 Leonard after that win over Carlsberg against 3-2, 1-0 Howe. After the Bulldogs beat SNS 56-14, somebody is going to get to 2-0. Somebody is going to be the front runner for a playoff spot in this district by getting to 2-0. And that's why this is the second most important game to me, because you have a Leonard team that expects to be in the playoffs. You have a Howe team that didn't make it last year, is playing better these last couple weeks. I think they're starting to, I don't want to say find themselves offensively. They're finding the right mix. They have had some situations where they had to pull the game out against Pilot Point. They made some plays on both sides of the ball. And then you have the game last week, winning 56-14, doing it in a way that nobody expected, going up 35-0 at halftime, doing it in the air. We've talked week after week. This is how Howe's going to win. They're going to grind a game out. They're going to make it difficult on you. They're going to run time of possession. And then they come out last week and they hit some huge plays in the passing game. Ryland Strong goes 7 of 9 for an even 200 yards. Does have an interception, but does have 4 touchdown passes, 3 of them to Reichen Cross, who has the 3 touchdowns on 3 catches for 153 yards. Garen Langford had the other touchdown on his lone catch of 33 yards. And so you have that in the passing game, but then you also have that ground game that we talked about, still racks up huge numbers, 363 yards on 42 carries. Braden Ulmer leads the way, 12 carries for 129 yards, 2 touchdowns. Strong also had 9 carries for 111 yards and also ran for a touchdown. Bryce Piper, 9 carries for 74 yards and a touchdown. Garrett Rogers, 10 carries for 53 yards. So, 563 total yards. Everything you could ask for when you start in your district play. Keeping that momentum from non-district. You've got a winning record. You want to show that you can compete with the people in this district. That's a really good start to do that. Now you've got, like I said, you've got a team. They're coming off a district opening win. They have been a perennial playoff team in this district, and they're coming to your place. And Leonard's going to want to throw it around. They've got a very good quarterback in Jacoby LeCook. Their only loss on the season is against Jefferson to open the season, who was number 8 in the 3A Division I rankings. So after that, they've kind of been on a roll with 4 straight wins. And like I said, their offense is really good. So this. I don't say it's not a must win, obviously, but if you want to make the playoffs a much bigger reality, this is an interesting spot for Howe to try and show that. And I think, like I said, they've got some good feelings. They've got some good vibes. They're in that place where you want to be as a program that coming off a year like they had last year, where things didn't go their way. They're forcing their way into the conversation, and I think that's all you can ask when you have a coaching change, even though it's only a promotion from within. That there's still the tweaks and everything that come with that, and they've done a good job in regards to that. Like I said, when you've got a winning record after 5 games, if you have another winning record after 5 games, we're talking about the playoffs, and at the very least, I think that's been the goal for Howe, and this would be a huge step towards that. We'll see if they can get to 2-0 as they host Leonard in that 7-3A Division II game at Bulldog Stadium, 7:30 on Friday night. And the last game for the locals in that district, S&S going on the road to Blue Ridge. S&S is 0-5, 0-1 after that loss to Howe. Blue Ridge is 3-1 overall, and like we said, they are about to start district play. They had the bye last week. So S&S in the loss to Howe, again, they did some stuff in the second half. The game had already been established with Howe taking that big halftime lead. Joe Orr had another good game for S&S, 5 catches for 64 yards and a touchdown. Hunter Corville throws for 84 yards, also ran 12 times for 53 yards and a touchdown in that one. And again, I feel like a broken record when we talk about S&S, but it's about getting better under new direction, new coach, new staff, a lot of new players, a lot of younger players trying to make an impact. You see what a guy like Joe Orr's done, a young kid that is doing a good job in the passing game. He's had some big games. I looked it up when I was putting the previews and stuff together. What you talk about tangible improvement, and I know they don't have a win. They've lost 21 straight games, but as I've mentioned at a couple of points through the season, they're playing better, and it's tangible results. Some of the games are closer. Some of the scores are not as lopsided. Just from an offensive standpoint, in 10 games last year, S&S scored a total of 84 points. they've already surpassed that number. They're at 92 points right now, and they've still got 5 games to go. That's improvement. And I know it's hard to talk about that when you have a team that is still winless and trying to get that first win, but it's obvious that they've gotten better over last year, and I think that's a huge step for kids in believing. And they've had some games where they've played with some people, they just haven't been able to put it together. And it's a good foundation being laid. If you continue to be competitive and you can have some of those spurts, I think that can bode well for the future. Blue Ridge, again, hosting this game, district opener. They're in sort of the same position as Leonard. They started 3-0 instead of riding a winning streak. And before they went into their bye, they lost to Honey Grove, who was number 7 in the 2A Division 1 rankings. So their loss is not a bad loss. And they were playing well before they got into that matchup, and then they went into their bye. So they're rip-roaring to get back on the field. They've had a bad taste in their mouth the last couple of weeks. I think they thought they could maybe kind of play with Blue Ridge with Honey Grove, and then Honey Grove pulled away. And so they're anxious to get going, and I think they want, again, they know somebody's going to lose in that Hal Leonard game. They want to be 1-0, have Gunner be 1-0, and then have the winner of the Hal Leonard game be 2-0, and sort of set things up for them in this game. So we'll see what happens with SNS going to Blue Ridge for that 7-3A Division II game on Friday night at 7:30. And the team that is not playing this week in 7-3A Division II is the Gunner Tigers, and we said they beat Bells 42-6, and they were up 21-0 after the first quarter, scored a touchdown in each of the ensuing quarters, held Bells to 175 yards all on the ground because that's what Bells does, and that was on 43 carries. So to hold that offense under 200 yards is very good. Balanced offense for them, 204 yards rushing, 203 yards passing. Back to the Gunner of old. We said this after that 2-game stretch with Anna and Salina. I will point out Salina this week is ranked the number 1 team in 4A Division 1. So not a bad loss by any stretch, but that shows you the strength of the schedule and that what Gunner is willing to do in playing them. And we said once that 2-game stretch was over, no matter what happened, win or lose, that once they got back to the lower level schools in 3A in their own division, that they would start looking like the Gunner of old. And this is what the last several years we've come to expect from Gunner. Build a huge lead, not really be challenged, put up huge numbers or big numbers. In this one, Preston Tarpley, 10 of 12 passing for 166 yards and 2 touchdowns. Both of those went to Mitchell Gage. Both of his catches, touchdowns for a total of 90 yards. Dylan Tokars with a touchdown run early. Easton Overman with a touchdown run early. Brock Body finishes with 11 carries for 73 yards. Jay Campidi, 8 carries for 49 yards and a touchdown. Gage also had a touchdown run on his only carry. And this is what I think you can expect from Gunner the rest of the way. That's just what they do. That was their 51st straight district victory, and I don't know who's going to be able to challenge them in this district, but again, it's been that way for the last seven years since they've last lost a district game. So a very Gunner-like district opener to put up the big numbers, both sides of the ball, and that's what we expect from them. They've still got some guys that have been missing. We'll see how they're progressing through the bye week. Again, I think it's at a good time for them as they get ready to get to the stretch run. We all know the biggest thing is to get as healthy as possible for the playoffs. But again, they're off to the 1-0 start in district, 3-2 overall with those 2 losses to Anna and Salina. And the question is, can somebody beat them between now and the end of the regular season? And until somebody does, I think everybody's going to assume that, they will win the district title again until somebody can prove that they are better on the field. And so that's where Gunner is going into their bye week. They will take on, I will pull up next week's schedule. They will take on Callisburg next week. So a big game, like we said, for Callisburg and Bells, especially for Callisburg, because they're going to have Gunner coming up next week. So they'll hope to be in a better position than Bells would with that matchup, and Gunner will be waiting after their bye this week in 7-3A Division 2. Dropping down to the 2A ranks, we only have one, and below, I guess, because we can throw in Texoma Christian now, we only have one team playing down here in the 2A ranks. Assuming we have two teams playing, but there's only one game because they're playing each other, and that is Tom Bean at Tioga in District 6-2A Division 1 play. Tom Bean is 4-1 and 0-1 in district play after they lost 21-17 against Whitewright. Tioga is sitting at 3-2. They are 1-0 after they beat Trenton 46-14. And if you look at the rest of this district, Whitewright is obviously undefeated. They have the bye. So we'll talk about them in a second. And the other 1-0 team in this district with Whitewright and Tioga is Alvord, who won their first game in beating Nakona. So those are the three teams that are 0-1. Excuse me, are 1-0. 0-1 is Tom Bean, Trenton, Nakona, and Wolf City. They played last week. They played Timpson on their bye because they had an earlier bye in their schedule. So Wolf City will jump into the fray this week against Nakona, and we will see how that looks. Trenton and Alvord are going to play each other in the other game in this district because Whitewright has the bye. So Tom Bean, Tioga. We'll take it from the Tom Bean side first. Had the huge matchup with Whitewright. 4-0 versus 4-0. Somebody was going to get to 5-0. Unfortunately for the Tomcats, it was not them. I talked about how I had no idea what to expect in that game. Was it going to be an offensive showcase up and down the field? Both teams had been scoring in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s and the 60s against their other opponents. So was this game going to be 49-42, or was it going to be a defensive battle? Because both of the defenses have been really good, and that's what it turned out to be. 21-17. Whitewright scores a touchdown in the first three quarters. Tom Bean had a lead briefly in the second quarter at 10-7, and then Whitewright scored right before half in the last couple minutes to go back in front 14-10. They scored again in the third quarter to open the third quarter to go up 21-10. Tom Bean gets back in within the final margin later in the third period. They had a chance at the end to win. They got near the goal line, had some passes go incomplete, weren't able to pull that game out 24-21. And so that's the biggest thing for me with Tom Bean this week is they had a month of success, relatively easy games. The games that were sort of close, they had the lead in. It wasn't like they had to do anything crazy at the end. And this was their first taste of a defeat. This was their first tough game where they weren't able to make the plays. And so how are they going to handle that? This is a team, like I said before the season, they had the goal of making the playoffs now that they could. This was a team that would have made the playoffs based on the standings, but were ineligible. And now here's a game that last year they won against their rivals, and this year they didn't. So how are they going to bounce back from that and come out and do what they need to do to avoid an 0-2 start? I don't think that's a killer in this district, but 0-2 would I don't want to say it would put some doubts in their mind because they've had the success that they've had over the last year and a half, but it would not be a good spot for them to be in to drop to 0-2. Tioga, on the other hand, we've talked about them this season. Two of the two wins they had coming into district, close games, down to the wire, have to make plays at the end. They do, and they could have easily come into district play at 0-4 based off of their those games that were close, and instead they're 2-2. But their thing has been injuries, and we talked about it last week. They were down their starting quarterback, starting their backup, who is a capable backup that helped lead them to state in 7-on-7, so they're not feeling too worried about that. And then they've got to play the latter part of that game with guys who aren't quarterbacks because he breaks his collarbone. So we know he's gonna be out for that game against Trenton. What we didn't know was if the starter Rocky Urick was gonna be back. He wasn't, and so Tioga goes with the duo that closed the game against Lone Oak to end non-district play, Austin Norwood and Johnny Dorpinghouse, to mix and match, and depending on, I would assume, series and field position and how the game was being played, to rotate or use them as decoy, or however, put them both in the backfield at the same time, make people not know what they're doing, and it worked. Obviously by the score 46-14. Tioga gets up big 22-8 after the first quarter. They make it stand up. They tack on some touchdowns in the fourth. And if you didn't know Austin Norwood was technically not a quarterback, you wouldn't know it because he went 8 of 8 passing for 261 yards. Had 3 touchdowns. And again, this is a case where if you don't know the backstory of a kid or a program or whatever, that a couple years ago, Austin Norwood had to play quarterback. He's normally a receiver, but injuries back then, with a different head coach, they had to work on the fly. Injuries before the season. Hey, you're a quarterback now, and he was good at it. I mean, he's a really good athlete. Does a lot of does the other sports a lot, which is what every kid does. At the 2A level, you're playing other sports and good at them. But to come out, after essentially a week of practice at the position, because again, you're the third string. So how much work are you actually getting done behind the 2 guys that are expected to play? And then to come out and go 8 of 8 passing, 261 yards, and 4 touchdowns, 4 carries for 33 yards and a score, and hit on some huge plays in this game. A lot of the touchdowns are long passes or big plays. Slade Babbitt had a 46-yard touchdown catch. Greeley McAden and Jonathan Hernandez had touchdown catches. Johnny Dorpinghouse 3 catches for 83 yards. He also had 5 carries for 80 yards and a touchdown. And so that was as I don't want to say unexpected of a game, because I don't think Trenton knew what they were going to get going into this game either. And again, that's a team that was off to a good start, but then they have to look at this and go, well, is Rocky York going to be back to be back at the starting role? What are they gonna do with these 2 guys that finished the game? Are they just going to run a wildcat? Are they just going to run the ball every play? Which is not what Tioga does. Coach Birdwell, that's not his style. He's air raid. He wants to throw it. That's the way he runs an offense. But again, if you're on your third quarterback, how much can you make that happen? And Tioga was able to do that. So I guess if you're Tom Bean, you kind of have a better expectation of how they're going to play it without the top 2 quarterbacks. But again, it's hard to tell because it's a crazy number to say this. Tioga only ran 19 plays. Because these plays were so big. The McAden touchdown is a 62-yard touchdown. The Babbitt touchdown, 46-yard touchdown. That's his only catch. That's McAden's only catch. So it's hard to tell what they're going to do if they actually have to put together a sustained drive. Will they be able to do that? I think Tom Bean is obviously a step up from Trenton. That's sort of been the case in the pecking order in this district the last couple of years, even though I think Trenton's better than what they had shown last year. But I think it also shows how good Tioga has been the last couple of years. They've won 10 of their last 11 district games. They are trying to go for at least a share of a 3rd straight district title, and they've had these kids out. Again, it's for whatever reason, there have been a couple teams around here that have had some bad injury luck for especially some key spots, and the fact that you can be on your third quarterback which takes two guys that are your main weapons in the receiving game. When you have your actual guy at under center that have to go in the backfield, they can't throw to themselves. So you've got to rely on your depth at receiver, which Tioga has felt they've had, and obviously that is showing. But what does it mean going forward? I think for one, it says to a lot of people, hey, they can win without some of their best guys, whether it's at key positions, other positions on offense, and other positions on defense. And but this is obviously going to be a step up from Trenton, and so this is an office. So I think it's a huge game on both sides. Like I said, it's a fascinating matchup because of what happened last week for both of these teams. So I'm going to be at this game because Denison is on the bye and Sherman is playing on Thursday night. So I'm excited to get down to Tioga and see Tom Bean at Tioga in 6-2A Division I action, 7 o'clock on Friday, Bulldog Field, for what should be a key district matchup there. The other teams that we have down here at the lower levels, they do not play this week. They are all on bye. So I mentioned Whitewright has the bye in this district because of the odd number of teams. So they unfortunately, again, we talked about this with teams going into byes. You have a great win, a rivalry win. You're continuing your best season since 2010. You win 21-17. You make some big plays early. You make a big defensive stand late. And your reward is to sit around for 2 weeks, which, again, maybe that's a good thing, maybe it's not. But I would imagine that Whitewright would love to get back out there and keep the momentum going. But even still, another good showing for them. Easton Helgren has 8 catches for 153 yards and 2 touchdowns. Alex Reeves has 2 catches for 32 yards and has the other score. Colt Yancey, 12 of 17 passing, 199 yards, 3 touchdowns, 1 interception. On the ground, Gage Walker, 9 carries for 44 yards. Helgren had 4 carries for 33 yards. And that was going to be the question with Whitewright coming into that matchup against Tom Bean, is they had been putting up big numbers on everybody. What would they do against what was going to be the best team that they had played? No offense to the people that they had played before, but Tom Bean was the best team, or at the very least, the best defense that they were going to play to this point. And so you had an offense that had scored 57 points, 51 points, 42 points, and 56 points. So how were they going to handle adversity? How were they going to handle a turnover? How were they going to handle the other team taking a lead, which is what happened in this game? Like I mentioned, that it was 10-7 in the second quarter. And how did Whitewright respond? They went and scored right before halftime, was able to extend that in the second half. So a very good response for a team that obviously had not been in the situation we've talked about with every passing week. It's been longer and longer since Whitewright had a start to a season like this, for a team that won only 2 games, that now is sitting here at 5-0 and has to be thinking not just playoffs, but can we challenge for the district title? We're going to find out with them after they have the bye this week. They have Tioga next week. So pending that Tom Bean Tioga matchup, that's obviously one that they're going to be watching to see how close that game is, and then they jump into that. So that's going to be an interesting game for them coming out of their bye. But again, to this point for the season for them, 5 stars. You couldn't do any better. You started the first month undefeated. You opened district play with your rivals. You beat them in a really good game, an exciting game, a down to the wire game, and you're sitting at 5-0. So that's where Whitewright sits in this district, at least as they said on the bye. I would assume, just looking at some of the scores for the people this week, I don't know Tom Bean Tioga. That's really interesting to me. And I don't know Trenton Alvord. But I have a feeling Wolf City's going to beat Nakona, and so they'll be sitting at 1-0. But those other 2 scores are probably going to be really interesting for Whitewright and where this district could potentially be when they get ready to go back to work next week against Tioga. So that's where Whitewright sits. The other 2A team is, of course, Collinsville. They closed out non-district play last week with their trip to Graham to take on Coleman for their neutral site game. And again, another really good performance by Collinsville. They win 52-6. We said this was a winless team taking on not just an undefeated team, but a ranked team. And the rankings came out, and Collinsville rose in those rankings again. They are up to 4th in the 2A Division I Dave Campbell's rankings, and right in front of them is one of their district mates in Munster, and that's the biggest thing about going into 8 2A Division II play. It looks like those two are going to be the cream of this crop. Their matchup is probably going to decide the district title. I think Lindsay's probably going to want to have something to say about it. They're 4-1, and Santo, Era are both 3-2 along with Munster, and Chico is at 1-4. So I think we kind of know where everybody potentially could stand. I think there is sort of a pecking order that's going to get underway in 2 weeks. Everybody has this week off. They have we play 5 games, and we all take the bye, and then we all play 5 games to finish in district play. And like I said, Collinsville is rolling. You win 52-6. You're up 17-0 after the first quarter. You're up 31-0 at halftime. Coleman avoids the shutout after you're up 52-0. They were able to get on the board then. They only finished with 174 yards of offense. And again, in this one, J.J. Jenkins, 29 of 43 passing for 327 yards, 5 touchdowns, all to different guys as well. That's been a staple for them to spread the ball around. Landry Spivey, 8 catches for 74 yards and a touchdown. Carter Lawrence, his only catch is a 66-yard touchdown. Jackson Spivey, 8 catches for 63 yards. Peyton Davidson, 3 catches for 38 yards, and he did not have a touchdown. Paxton Davidson did, and Chad Davidson did, but Peyton got left out of the mix. Paxton Davidson had a touchdown. Chad Davidson, 3 catches for 35 yards and a touchdown. Kason Schaefer, 3 catches for 29 yards and a touchdown. Chase Shepard scored on the ground. Brandon Cantu, 19 carries for 121 yards. Garrett Trevino, 6 carries for 40 yards and a touchdown. Isaiah Smith kicked a field goal. And like I said, they're just able to. It's almost like last year didn't lose all the people that they lost, because they have been rolling right along. We sit here and they've scored 213 points in 5 games. They've rarely been tested when it comes to opponents. They continually put up these great performances. You hold Tioga to 13 points. You hold Cooper to 2. So obviously that's not the defense there. So the defense basically pitched a shutout there. They held Callisburg to 14 points. Wolf City scored 42. And again, I think Wolf City is really good. I think we're gonna see that in that other district. They're a perennial playoff team. And then you have this game this week with Coleman to hold them to 6. And again, you're talking about on the offensive side, 52 points this week, 55 points last week, 38 points against Cooper, 40 points against Tioga. The low is 28 against Callisburg. So Collinsville just continues to do what they do. So everybody's on the bye in that district. When we get back to action, Collinsville's going to play at Chico. The big one next week is Munster-Lindsay for their rivalry game. So we'll see what Lindsay can do with Munster. That'll obviously be big to see, because Lindsay and Collinsville play on the 18th of October the next week. So that's a huge first start for Lindsay. They're going to play the big dogs right out of the chute, and that could decide where they end up seeding wise. They'll know pretty early. And so that's what 8-2A Division II is going to hinge on once they get going the first couple weeks. And we'll see where Collinsville stands after they open district play next week at Chico at 7 o'clock after their 5-0 start. And the last team, we get to talk about them playing a game for the first time. Unfortunately, their game 2 weeks ago that we previewed did not end up getting played, is Texoma Christian. They kicked off their 6-man season last week at home against Rockwell Providence. They got a 50-2 victory, and the reason they didn't play, talking with Coach Townsend, against Carrollton Prince of Peace, was the life of a 6-man program. They only had 9 kids, and they didn't want to take the risk against a team that had almost triple the number of athletes on their roster to have to deal with injuries. Again, we said when we did the preview for Texoma Christian at the beginning of the year how they were going to wait to get into it. They were only going to play 5 games. Now they're only going to play 4 games. They were going to play 6 games. Now they're going to play 5 games. They had low numbers. They didn't want to play a full non-district, have guys get beat up, have guys get seriously hurt, and then the games that actually count, you're missing key players or you don't have enough players and you have to forfeit, and then you don't have a chance to make the playoffs. So they're in that 4-team district, like we talked about. They've got 3 district games. That's what's going to decide their season. So they wanted to pare it down, wait a little bit to get into it, and then they had some injuries to where they only had 9. So the Prince of Peace game got canceled, and Prince of Peace played somebody else. So this ended up being the season opener for TCS. Jake Squires, 9 carries, 139 yards, and 5 touchdowns. Also had a 58-yard touchdown catch from Nate Reed, who was 8 of 12 passing for 176 yards and 2 touchdowns. Also had 4 carries for 70 yards and a score. Brody Stokes, 5 catches, 97 yards and a touchdown. Cade Adley, 2 interceptions. And Texoma Christian gets off to a great start. Great to see them be able to get back on the field and have the success right away. So they're going to take this week off. That was intentional. And then they're going to play Waco Eagle Christian. They're going to host them on October 11th, and then they're going to kick off district play. So hopefully with the bye week off, they'll be able to get some of those guys back that had been missing, that were sidelined, have a nice little district tune-up, and then get into a district that is I don't want to say shaping up interesting. It's hard to tell because obviously we're at the 6-man level, and I'm not as well versed as you would think for the 6-man level. Longview Christian Heritage is off to a 3-1 start. Greenville Christian is at 1-4, and Dallas Fairhill is at 0-4. So I assume you're going to have to beat 2 of those people to make the playoffs. It's tough to tell with TAPS. They don't have set rules like in the UIL where it's the top 4 because not all their districts are balanced because they're so spread out. Some places, like this was a district that Rockwell Providence was supposed to be in, but they pulled themselves out of TAPS. Another team that was in there was supposed to have enough people to play, have enough for a team, and they didn't. So this district ended up being smaller than what it was. Some of these other districts you look and there's like 8 teams in it because they're all away from everybody else, but they're clustered together. And so they do it based on the size of your district, and they fill out the brackets that way. It's a whole thing. But I would assume at the very least, if you finish second in this district, you're in good shape. So if I'm Texoma Christian at this point, I say if I can beat Greenville Christian and Dallas Fairhill, I'm in the playoffs. But you might be third and still get in. That, unfortunately, has not been decided. But, hey, I don't make the rules. TAPS does. So that's where Texoma Christian is. Once they get back in action after this bye week, they will be in their district play. That's TAPS Division 3, District 3 for their final 3 games to see if they are able to make the playoffs from there. So that's where we stand in Week 6. Again, it's a very light schedule. We get the 5 teams on bye, and we still have some interesting games. There's always interesting games every week. There's always usually a Grayson County battle like we have with Tom Bean and Tioga this week. So it's exciting. This is where I get really excited about it because you really start to see things taking shape, and every week we can talk about what does this mean, and man, this game is huge, and this is a close game, and whoever wins that, or when's the upset going to happen? Because there's always upsets and teams that you don't think are going to beat people. This is the time of year when that starts happening, and we'll see how it all plays out and what it means for playoffs as we head into Week 6 of the football season. Thanks for listening. Thanks to our sponsor, Frontier Golf Carts. Experience the thrill of savings to celebrate their new Denison location, proudly serving the greater Texoma area, where they're launching with the lowest prices of the year. This marks an exciting new chapter in the 11-year history of Frontier Golf Carts as they expand from their original location in Salina. For their grand opening, come see the awesome collection of new carts with up to $1,500 off, including the 2024 Frontier EV Lightning F4 with all seats facing forward. New lithium battery powered golf carts with backup cameras and touchscreen entertainment start at $7,495. Visit frontiergolfcarts.com or check out their Facebook page for the latest specials. So once again, here on the Herald Democrat Sports Podcast, I'm Jason De La Rosa, sports editor of the Herald Democrat. You can follow me on Twitter at Jason De La Rosa. You can follow our Facebook pages, Herald Democrat and the All-Texomaland page. If you just want the high school sports stuff, All-Texomaland on Facebook is the place to go. Everything gets posted there. Football, volleyball, cross country, whatever's going on at that time of the year, that's the place to find it. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll talk to you next week here on the podcast.